Sweet home, Santa Barbara, where the skies are so blue. Sweet home, Santa Barbara, what's worked for me can work for you.
Welcome back, friends, to Sweet Home Santa Barbara. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson. I'm with my friend and co-host and realtor,
Scott Williams.
And today, Scott, you're going to introduce our guest, Dan Encell. So why don't we begin? He sounds like a fascinating guy.
Yeah, I've known Dan for quite a few years. We're in the same office here at Berkshire Hathaway HomeServices, California Properties. And Dan is known far and wide throughout our community for his specialization in selling homes in Montecito. And of interest, he started at UCSB. That was probably your introduction to the town, Dan? Was that?
I had actually gone to the Kate School in Carpinteria, which was my actual introduction to the town. Fell in love with it then and sort of followed out with UCSB after that.
And then on from there to UCLA, where you took part in the law program, became a lawyer, practicing law, and then decided to make your way back to Santa Barbara with a career switch to real estate brokerage, wanting to be more in a commission-based than an hourly-based business. And that has proven to be very successful because now you have had closings of more than $2 billion worth of real estate here in Santa Barbara, which by anybody's measure is fantastic. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, Dan, I heard that you're a lawyer and $2 billion of real estate. Sorry to hear that you haven't been very good at your career. That's quite amazing, actually. Was being a lawyer helpful? And if so, how in being a real estate agent?
It was extremely helpful because when I first started out, it felt like when I moved to this town that everybody here had lived here their whole life and I was relatively new here. And so I needed something to distinguish myself from the other people there. So that extra educational background and transactional experience was extremely helpful, Jonathan, in terms of helping me get a good start in a career in high-end residential real estate.
I'm curious as to how high-end real estate might be different than the regular low-end real estate where you're dealing with just million-dollar homes rather than tens of millions of dollar homes.
So for most people, no matter what the price range is, their home is their largest asset. It just for higher end, there tend to be, more moving parts. There are more tax issues, more contractual complexities to the transactions there, estate planning issues there, just more issues that come up than would come up in a lower priced transaction, certainly.
More complicated, for sure.
Yes.
And Scott?
Well, you have, represented buyers and sellers. You have I don't know if you cater more one to the other, and how do you sort of balance the differing needs and expectations of buyers or sellers?
So when I first started selling real estate, I loved working with buyers. I was like a Chamber of Commerce cheerleader, showing them around the Santa Barbara area, introducing them to the community. But then over time, I sort of watched other top agents and saw that most of them were more listing oriented. And so over time, sort of gradually shifted my business to more of the listing side where you actually have more control and easier to be more selective about how you work with your clients. It's more business-like. So I gradually made that transition after sort of watching other good agents and seeing how they did it there. But I enjoy working with both, but I would say that probably 70% of my business is focused on representing sellers.
Well, that means that you're doing quite a lot of merchandising and marketing, and so more of a specialization in that area?
Yes. And again, as the real estate term is farming, where you're going out looking for sellers to work with. So you pick a geographic area that you like. And for me, I do mailers to those areas once a quarter to give them an update on what's going on in their market and specifically, how values are doing for their type of home there. So been doing that for over 30 years now.
I hear that you've been involved in various Santa Barbara charities and clubs. I'm wondering, is that a personal thing, a business thing? How have the two mixed or influenced each other?
Well, luckily, Jonathan, you can sort of mix them both pretty well there. It was sort of a blend there. But when I first started selling real estate in the late 1980s here, there weren't a lot of young professional people in Santa Barbara, and it was a very difficult town to get started in because of that. And so I set up a organization called the Santa Barbara Young Professionals Club to sort of create a venue for young professionals to meet other people and interact with them. And then we grew that into a charitable event also. So we did a lot of fundraisers for local organizations. And that was in the mid 1990s there. And happy to say that that organization is still flourishing today. So it was very rewarding to see it continue on after I'd left.
Oh, and has that been helpful in your career as well, that type of community engagement?
It has, for sure. And I do the same thing in real estate. When I first started out with the company that Scott and I work for, there weren't a lot of great high-end agents in the company in that time there. So I set up a networking group with other agents from other companies to share information. And we've been doing that for 23 years now also. So a monthly meeting with other agents from different companies to network and share information that might not be available to you if you weren't part of their company.
That's nice.
Well, Dan, in the Montecito marketplace, you've been a rock of the business here for a really long time. What would you say about working the Montecito market? What's your
So Montecito is a very unique community where there's about 10,000 people, maybe 4,000 homes here. And, over the years, you've seen shifts in the demographics where frequently, it will be sort of a mix between retired people and people with young children and not much in between. So sort of a bookend community there. So when my kids were younger, I was part of that younger part of the community where kids are in the local schools there. And that was a great way to meet other people. Now I think I'm more at the tail end of that, more in the, my kids are all gone now, so I'm an empty nester there. So I think I'm sort of at the other end of the spectrum. And I see other successful agents in town here who are at the opposite end, where their kids are young and in school and networking with that group of people also. So it's obviously great to do both, but I think it's sort of an age thing. And, if you have kids and what age and stage your kids are at also, that's always been sort of a big part of, of my market is, the people that are similar age, I guess, with me. And when they were young kids, that was a very dynamic part of the market for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, in Montecito, people come in from out of town. People buy homes that are already in Montecito. How does the Montecito marketplace, in terms of like where the buyers come from, might be different than other parts of town? Well, how is it in Montecito?
So Montecito Union, there's two public schools in Montecito. There's Cold Spring and there's Montecito Union, and both are excellent schools. The biggest difference, though, is Montecito Union, people would move from all over the country specifically to be in that school district. So we were, seeing a lot of buyer demand that was very specific, and they were moving with young children, and they were moving specifically so their children could be in that school district, which sort of had a blend of a public school, but most of the financial benefits of being in a private school with phenomenal teachers there. So it's a pretty unique draw for that community to have that sort of school that people would come from all over the country to be in that specific elementary school district.
Do you get involved in fixing up properties or new properties, or is it more just selling properties as is?
I love doing that. If I had my perfect world, I would do both. But the problem is I tend to get so involved with the remodeling and the building there that it takes away from my day job, which is selling real estate there. So I also don't like competing with my clients down here. So all of the building and remodeling that I do is up in the Paso Robles area. So I do it, but not down here because I don't want to compete with my clients and I don't want to take away from my time from selling real estate, but I absolutely love it. And, I find it very rewarding.
It's always nice to have a creative outlet in life, and it sounds like that's yours.
It is indeed. I thoroughly enjoy it, both the homes and the landscaping around the home also. So I enjoy both of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I've heard, I remember I saw a wine bottle one time, Dan Encell. What do you have going on with wine or wineries?
So I grew up in Paso Robles, which has become quite a fascinating wine area in California. It wasn't really when I was growing up there, but it has over the years. We had property up there and we planted a fairly large vineyard in 2000. And so subsequent to that, I added 4 other vineyards. So we had a total of 5 vineyards up there growing Pinot Noir and Malbec grapes there. So I'm a weekend farmer, Scott. So yeah, that is that's the other outlet there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, your experience with so many transactions in Montecito, I'm sure is of interest to both the public and to the realtors who listen to us. We have a difficulty in real estate of talking about our clients or individual situations because we have to keep that from, we just can't blab about anything we want to talk about in real estate. But I'm sure that there's many opportunities that you have to deal with people in buying and selling homes in Montecito. And I don't know what you might be able to share about that part of the business.
So Montecito is fascinating in that no one chose to move here because they could make more money here. They all chose it for quality of life. And so you have 1,000 different stories on how people were successful elsewhere and why they chose to move here. So it's a fascinating business in that regard. And you get a lot of famous people, famous in terms of, celebrity, but also people that are famous in their industry, whatever their industry was there. So there's a broad definition of rock star, and there's a lot of rock stars here in different fields and how they were successful elsewhere and why they chose to live here. But I think that's the real common thread here is people chose it for quality of life. They were successful in another area, and then they chose to move here because this town, this community offers them a lot of what they seek in life, really, especially after they've been successful.
Mm-hmm. Is that different working with people who are very rich and successful? And if so, how might one work with, or what are their desires or demands that might stand out from other people?
So, Jonathan, you would think that, but after a brief time of working together, most of the facade wears off pretty quickly, and you find out that no matter how successful somebody was or is, or how famous they are, in the real estate transaction, everyone is emotional. Everyone needs hand-holding. Everyone is very appreciative of the help that you give them and needs the help that you give them. So initially, there's a little bit of starstruck, and then it wears off very, very rapidly. And then they're just, very emotional, just like anybody else.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Well, this is really informative, Dan. If you are looking at things that you've got, like your current initiatives, things that you might be doing, future plans or projects, things that you have in the pipeline, what's coming up for Dan?
So I'm going to keep doing this as long as I enjoy selling real estate, and I love selling real estate. So the plan is to continue working and meeting fascinating people and trying to help them and being a productive part of the community. So that's my perfect world, is to keep doing it as long as I enjoy doing it, and I love doing it.
So you've been very successful. What words of wisdom might you give to the other people listening that want to be rather successful in real estate?
So the one thing that I think is helpful is to sort of look at your career like a snowball. And the more effort you put into building up that snowball and pushing it, the bigger it's going to get. And the more effort you put into it in the early parts of your career to build a bigger snowball, the easier the rest of your career is. A friend of mine 30 years ago said, it's easy to make a lot of money in real estate. It's hard to make a medium amount of money in real estate, meaning that if you're at the top of the game and you're really involved with everything, it comes much easier than if you're just sort of doing it part-time or working just a little bit at it, not putting a lot of marketing and advertising and effort into it there. So I think the more effort you put into it, the easier it gets there.
Yeah, I've heard that if you're really good at something, you get mediocre results. If you're outstanding, you get ridiculously outstanding results.
Yes, yeah, and it's sort of a game of inches there. That extra little bit translates into a lot more success there. So I just don't think a lot of people are willing to give that extra little bit to make the difference between mediocre and very successful.
Mm-hmm. Any last thoughts, Scott or Dan?
Well, I'm glad we could have you on, Dan, and you've shared your journey with us. This is wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate being a guest on your guys' podcast. I appreciate it very much.
And how can people get a hold of you, Dan, if they're interested in doing that?
So I'm a phone guy. Phone number is 805-565-4896. Very easy to reach.
Okay. And Scott, best way to reach you?
Scott at scottwilliams.com.
Great. And we thank our listeners for another episode of Listening to Sweet Home Santa Barbara. Catch you next time.
Thank you both.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app. If you know someone preparing to sell their home, please tell them about the podcast. Visit scottwilliams.com to contact me and download the 2 free e-booklets, Is My House Saleable Now? And How Not to Buy a Money Pit. Thank you for listening.